It is a real pleasure to have Tom Keller join me today for a conversation. Tom is an incredible human being. He was the dean of the Fuqua School for 22 years. He is the person who created Team Fuqua. He's the person who made us a global business school. He is the architect of us becoming a great business school. And so it is with great pleasure that I welcome Tom today. Welcome, Tom. And it really is wonderful to have you at Fuqua, the place that you built. It's also a really terrible time as we see in the news these horrifying events with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And we, of course, have students from both Ukraine and Russia, thanks to you. And so I'm just curious how you feel about the current events in Ukraine.
Well, Bill, I'm really very concerned about it. I must say it's hard to understand why Putin is up to the activity that he is. And I can feel terribly sorry for the people in Ukraine. I was only there once, but I did take a train ride in Ukraine years ago when there was concern about how to make the railroads more efficient in the Soviet Union in those days. And they had different gauges from one country to another. And so we went with some executives from the rail industry in this country to try to see if we could provide some help at that time. But I really found the country to be very, very exciting country. That is Ukraine. And a wonderful day in Kiev. And it's just hard to see pictures today of the destruction that has taken place in the last few weeks.
So I said in asking my first question that thanks to you, we do have students from both Ukraine and Russia. And in fact, we have quite a few alumni that we've produced over the years from that part of the world. And so I'm going to let you explain a little bit why it is I say thanks to you, because of what we did in the Soviet Union so many years ago. And it feels like yesterday that the two of us were in Moscow celebrating the 25th anniversary of this program. So can you give us a little background on why Fuqua went to the Soviet Union?
Well, it was late 80s, probably 88, 1988, when I had a conversation with J.B. Fuqua. And he said to me, at those days, I think the Cold War was beginning to get a little less cold and a little bit warmer. And he said to me, you know, Tom, we need to do something at the Fuqua School that helps resolve the conflict that has existed between our countries. And I think what we have to do is to get each to understand the other better so that we really can join together in the future. And he said to me, I'm prepared to commit $5 million for you to engage in a program to help educate Russian managers on what it means to be in a market economy. He said, we aren't interested in ideological things. We just fundamentally want to look at the basics of economics. So I said, JB, we don't have any faculty who have visas, much less passports, to go to Russia. And he said, well, then you need to get some. So we set out to try to get the faculty committed to do international work. But at the same time, we began to have conversations with the State Department in the U.S. about how we might bring some Russians to the U.S. to help them see and observe and get to know us better, and get some of our faculty to go to Russia, to understand Russia better and how it can develop into a country that we work together and not opposed to each other. After several conversations with the State Department here, and with the Russian ambassador in Washington. JB said, we have to go, and I would like to meet Mr. Gorbachev. So we set up an appointment on short notice to go to Moscow with the expectation that we might have a meeting with Mr. Gorbachev. This was in probably April, May of 1989. And we arrived and were received with great ceremony, and but we didn't see Mr. Gorbachev. Instead, we saw Mr. Balkin, who was the deputy prime minister at that time. And we had a wonderful meeting with him in his office, talking about our interest, and he expressing his interest in having more computers. And JB said, we're not here to talk about computers, we're here to talk about education and increasing the understanding of each of our countries by the other. So that conversation took place. We visited for a week. JB and I visiting a variety of activities in Moscow and the neighboring area. And he's so one afternoon he said, Tom, we're going home tomorrow. And I said, well, JB, we don't have an agreement. He said, we're not going to get it on this trip. So it's okay. So we packed our bags and left. The Russians at that time were in great conversations about whether Mr. Yeltsin would ever be taken into the Russian, the Soviet at that time government. So we left with the understanding that we had not reached an agreement, but we would come back. So we carried on some communications, and we finally went back in December of '89. Had another meeting, and at that time, the officials agreed that we were not talking about computers, we were talking about education and understanding and sharing our various expectations. And we were going to do that by educating Soviet managers in an executive education format. And we designed a program that was about 3 weeks in the US at the business school here, and from 1 to 3 weeks with a similar company in an industry that the Russian represented, so they understood how their company might operate in this environment. We signed an agreement in December, and I think we got the first students here in May of '90. And we had, I think, 30 at the time, and we continued to do about 3 programs a year with 30 managers each time.
So ultimately, I think we educated more than 400 Soviet plant managers in this program. And I just want to make sure that the people heard the message, which is we talk today a lot about the importance of using business as a force for good. But this was an idea that JB had many, many years ago that suggests that this philosophy has been in the school's DNA for quite some time.
For quite a while. And we've tried to do that in a number of different arenas. That was the most important one.
Switching gears, I want to come back to this idea of using business as a force for good in the current environment. I think that the J.B. Fuqua, in addition to hoping that this connection between these two superpowers that we could turn down or warm up the very cold relationship, but he also had a pretty strong belief in capitalism and a view that capitalism was just way better than communism, and that if we could just show these Soviets how capitalism worked, then it would make it obvious that communism was inferior, causing communism to fall apart. Am I making that up, or is that something that JB believed?
He did believe that, but he didn't think we would get very far if we tried to say we wanted to help you understand capitalism, because he felt there were people were without necessarily understanding it, just opposed to capitalism. They had been taught, trained over many years, and the Russians, the Soviets, felt pretty strongly that their system was a better system. So his view was we need to demonstrate how it's better, not to talk about it is better, it can be better. And he felt that by bringing managers here, letting them, and we did take them, everyone, to a shopping center, just to walk through. And inevitably they would say, my goodness, you have 6 different kinds of mayonnaise, or whatever it might be. How do you decide which one to buy? And we said, well, we either have read about it, we've heard about it, or that's the one our mothers used. And so we buy the same one. But we have a choice, and choice is important to the consumer, and it's what makes the system work. When we had been to Moscow, we visited a shoe store in which they had all shoes, same size, same color, nothing else. And so we said, there is a difference in the product that the consumer can choose, and that's what's important about our system as opposed to the system which you now have. Things have changed in Moscow now, as we all know, but in those days there were substantial differences. And the belief was if they sort of understood what the system produced without arguing about the name of the system or what their perception of the system was, it would be much more effective in helping them to understand what the U.S. stands for. And I think we went a long way to improving that understanding.
Yeah. In fact, didn't J.B. Fuqua claim credit in a book, claim credit for the dissolution of the Soviet Union because we had shown, we hadn't told people capitalism was better, we simply showed them it was better.
I think that's right. J.B. never minded taking credit for things that he achieved, but he deserved a lot of credit because without his initial investment and encouragement and the doors that he could open, and that was important. We took to Moscow with us in December the senior assistant to one of the U.S. senators who could go, and as a government official, we got doors open that I would never have gotten open to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked to people at the very highest levels, but we also talked to workers in the factories. And we obviously brought managers here. And subsequently, we had our faculty who go there and see what was happening in the Soviet Union. So that helped a lot. I may have mentioned to you earlier, we rode for a week on the trains in Russia and Ukraine. We visited a number of cities. We frequently would have dinner in the railroad dining in a depot, and generally always a very fancy dinner. We would then get in our car, and the next morning we would get up in a new city. We'd spend the day visiting that city, have a banquet that night in the depot, get on another train, and go to the next. And we went by Chernobyl, we went in Kiev, we went to Donetsk. So we saw a fair amount of the Ukraine on that trip, as well as Russian cities.
So coming back to present times, again, this incredible violation of democratic sovereignty for the Ukraine, the Ukrainians, and we're seeing the reverse of what J.B. Fuqua tried to accomplish so many years ago, which is using business as a platform to build a bridge between these countries. And now because the Russians have done something that's so horrific in invading Ukraine, business is being used as a way to isolate the Russians. So does it feel ironic to you that as we've seen how business is used as a powerful force for a change in the world, that this role has changed from the original role in the Soviet managers program?
Well, it certainly has. And as I've thought about it and tried to read what I can about what Mr. Biden is doing in this country and what other countries are doing as well, it seems that they are using the system, which we talked about a lot, to say to the Russians, we can shut down that system so that you're no longer a player in that game. And hopefully, who knows, but hopefully it could convince Mr. Putin that this is not the better way to go. It's much better if we have inter system exchange, understanding, and not simply try to create another monopoly, as you will, in the area of the world, which he would like to include in the boundaries of Russia. So I don't know whether it will be successful. It's certainly bringing some pain outside of the Russia. I mean, all the pain is not falling on the Russians in this case, but I think it's an effort to say this system can be helpful to help them understand its power.
So your comment about even though the intent is to try to get Russia and Putin in particular to change course here, the pain doesn't all fall on Russia. And in fact, we're seeing a large number of U.S. businesses that are making decisions to pull activities out of Russia that come at a fairly significant cost to those businesses. They are making themselves less profitable. But they're doing so because maybe they believe there's a connection between capitalism and democracy. And when they see democracy threatened in Ukraine, that they're going to use the power of capitalism to show that it's really unacceptable to undermine sovereignty in this way.
It certainly seems to me that that's the objective. What I'm not certain of is to whether it will work. I mean, if you fundamentally don't believe in the system, which I guess is probably the case with Mr. Putin, or his desire for control over a large geographic area, that even in spite of that, he thinks he can succeed. But I think it's certainly putting a lot of pressure on a lot of people. And the leader may or may not be willing to listen to the people. It appears that he isn't. But maybe there'll be enough pressure brought by not only people outside the Soviet Union or Russia, but people within Russia who are being damaged, hurt economically by the actions that are taken. And they may have some influence on the government as to what they will tend to do. I don't think it's been proven yet, but I guess it's worth a try.
So as someone who led the business school and succeeded in really toning down the Cold War so many years ago, do you have any advice for our community in terms of what we can do to tone down what is now a very hot war and with enormous human cost?
Well, it's really hard to say because it seems to me, as I understand it, we have one man who has an objective and a desire to control a much larger geographic area. And I think he doesn't have the vote of the people in a very real sense. And they may be understanding to some degree the value that a market economy has been able to bring to them. And when this begins to shut down through the financial system as well as products, they might have sufficient power to help Mr. Putin see that there's a better way than the one he's pursuing. I'm not sure that's going to work, but it's worth a try. And it's a lot better than firing weapons. I think if we can possibly get through that there are serious consequences with the role he's chosen to take. And business can help, and it's probably the only force, short of war, that might be able to bring that message clearly to the world, literally, as we all suffer from it, as we all see what's going on. It may be possible that it would work. All I can say, let's hope it does.
Yes, thank you, Tom. Let's all hope that we can get an outcome that moves us in a positive direction, given the really traumatic events that are unfolding.
Bill, I think the difference 30 years ago in Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Putin was fairly significant. I think Mr. Gorbachev was also warning to see our countries live in peace and cooperate. And if you have that kind of leadership, I mean, he was not jumping up saying, I love capitalism, but he was looking for some better way for the world to exist together. I don't think I see that same desire in Mr. Putin. And so when the person at the top is not willing to be open to an understanding, or perhaps a better understanding of the interconnections of all the countries in the world and the value of having them cooperate, it's not clear that this will work, but it's worth a try.
Well, that's what makes it so scary. But again, yes, we have to try.
Yeah, we have to try. So far, although we are also having higher costs, I'm very optimistic and hopeful that this will work. And I'm certainly willing to pay the cost we have to pay to see if that'll happen.
Yes, indeed. I'm sure that one question that members of our community have is what can they personally do? I'm going to look to you for wisdom here, but in terms of what I'm thinking is that, first of all, that people in our community understand that democracy is worth fighting for, and that capitalism really can't flourish effectively without democracy. And so for every member of our community, if, yes, they do have to sacrifice in some way in order to try to defend Ukraine, to try to shut down the terrible incursion into Ukraine, then I would urge members of our community to do what they can to use the platform of business to make that happen. At the same time, I want to recognize that we have a lot of alumni because of our history in the region. We have a lot of alumni from not just Ukraine, but from Russia. And so my hope is that we can retain the humanity of our community in the face of this incredible violation of rights, of sovereignty, of loss of human life.
Well, I think that's right. And I guess what I would hope is that our alumni and people that they have influenced and been associated with in their world economy, as it has been for them, that they will understand again, the importance of keeping these boundaries open and living with your neighbor in a peaceful way. And there will be perhaps some short-term costs of convincing the leaders of their country that this is not the way to go. At the same time, there's enormous human sacrifice in the Ukraine from the war that is going on there. And you just hope that won't go on too long. But if they continue to talk to people and try to assume responsibility of their own actions and how it can influence the world economy and specifically the Russian economy, that they can bring change. No one of them are as powerful in the system as Mr. Putin, but hopefully they have a significant following that they can convince that there's a better way. And hopefully they will do that. And I think they will, because they have been exposed to an education system and to relationships that cross country boundaries that they have seen, observed, and been a part of. So hopefully they will be joining with us in the importance of a democracy and the need to stop this current crisis. But we'll see.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. It's been an incredible privilege to hear from you and hear about some of the history behind where we are today.
Well, it's good for me to hear that you're concerned about that. Not the history, but perhaps some lessons that we might learn and find a better way for our countries to live peacefully and cooperatively.
Yes, indeed.